Do MPs really know whether the government spending on the environment is effective? Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment Simon Upton has just tabled a report in Parliament on that matter, and he joins me now. Now, your report raises real questions about whether MPs, the government, can actually judge the effectiveness of spending. I mean, what's the big problem?
The big problem is that the way we report expenditure doesn't relate to the outcomes we're seeking. Basically, we have a very complex, sophisticated system for tracking expenditure. Ministers are purchasing outputs, outputs are being monitored, agencies are being monitored, but there's no capacity to stand back and say, what are the outcomes we're after? Is this money that's being spent actually effective? Is it achieving what you want to achieve? Nowhere does the system actually come back to that question.
So take pests, for example. So can we tell how many traps that might have been purchased and set, but not necessarily tell how many pests have actually been killed by those traps? And
I can't answer whether that's correct about pests and traps, but that's the sort of thing that we've got lots of information about bits of expenditure. But the trouble with the environment is that because it is cross-cutting, it involves a lot of agencies and it involves all of government and local government. You can't look at it through narrow sliced up bits. You've really got to be monitoring the overall outcomes. Now, that brings us back to monitoring itself. My very first report when I started this exercise 4 years ago was about how good's our monitoring of environment? What do we know about what's happening out there? And the answer is it's seriously deficient. Now, you carry seriously deficient monitoring through to a public spending system which is trying to do something about that, but it can't be well informed because we haven't got the monitoring, and you really have a telescope that's foggy at both ends.
And so I think you've estimated, that the government's spending a bit over $2 billion on?
Yes, nobody really knows. The government doesn't know, I don't know, but we've poured through this using a number of different slicing techniques, and we reckon the number's a bit over $2 billion, which is not huge in the scheme of public expenditure, but on the other hand, it's a lot of money. You would want to know that it was being spent effectively, and I don't think we can say that.
So the Treasury, which controls the purse strings, if you like, it doesn't know either?
No, it knows that money has been appropriated. It knows that money is being spent as it's supposed to be spent, and the Auditor General checks up on that. But as to effectiveness, well, no, the links are hazy. Now, we have a Ministry for the Environment. It does State of the Environment reports, but of course it hasn't got very good information often. It has to admit that there are data gaps everywhere. So what I'm trying to encourage the government and ministers to do is to say, look, high quality information is essential. You can't look after the environment if you don't know what's happening in it, and you can't spend money wisely trying to do something about the problem if you don't know whether it's having any effect.
So what's the solution?
The solution is to link together the whole chain from the Environmental Reporting Act through to the Public Finance Act. And in my view, we could quite easily barcode expenditure to relate it to the key outcomes we're after. So you could pull it all together. The solution is parliamentary select committees asking good questions. And my reports are all about trying to help select committees who represent us as taxpayers to ask the questions that need to be asked. Parliamentarians have to hold governments to account in our system, and they can only do it if the information is pulled together in a form that enables them to ask those questions. So really, if there's an audience for this report in the first place, it is backbench MPs.
I think the report says an exception is spending on climate change initiatives. Why is that?
Yes, it is, and it's an exception for a rather embarrassing reason. Because we've signed some international treaties, we are obligated to provide information in a consistent format. And we've been doing it for 30 years, and we've got very good climate data. So we actually know what's happening, we know the sectors of the economy in which it's happening, we can measure whether emissions are rising or falling, we've got a very sophisticated emissions trading system gathering information all the time. Great. And so now that the government has a long-term goal, it's passed a special act, then everything that we do is being tabulated against its contribution to reaching those goals. We've done it in just one area, and we've done it because we signed an international treaty. Surely, I would argue, we can look after the rest of the environment without having to do so because an international treaty required us to.
But surely that then is a template for how you would treat other environmental...
Yeah, I don't think you need to go to quite that level of detail. But the model is a useful one. I'm not advocating some hugely expensive system change here. I don't think you need to turn everything upside down. But we could do at a much higher level something which gives us the broad outcomes for something like biodiversity, looks at all the agencies that are contributing to that, get the expenditure identified, which contributes to the outcome, and then let the Select Committee ask some questions. Come on, look, we've been doing this for 10 years. Is it making a difference? Those are the sorts of practical questions I think taxpayers need answers to.
You were a government minister in the 1990s. Are things worse or better now in terms of tracking that spending and to work out how effective it is?
Well, they're better in some areas. When you mentioned climate is one. I think they just haven't moved forward. The early 90s was a time of fiscal crisis, and the public finance system that we set up was designed to try to get a hold of public expenditure, and did that very successfully and continues to do that very successfully. So I've got no problems with that, but I think we need to move on and say, okay, we need to control public expenditure. We also need to know whether the expenditure that we are prepared to spend is effective. Is it achieving the outcomes we want? And that's not just for the public finance system. As I say, it goes right back to environmental reporting. There's large areas of environmental stress where we really don't have information. Similarly, we spend quite a lot of money, anything between 200 and 500 million, depending on your estimates, on environmental research. But again, is it being spent on the things that we really need to spend it on? There is no way of pulling all of those threads together. So there's a major information problem at the heart of this. And what I'm talking about is low millions when what's at stake is many billions.
Is there, though, a political, if you like, advantage for the government of the day, and whichever the party's in power, in the sense that they can contribute, say they're spending this much on whatever, and say that's a tick in their favour, but without having to be held account to, well, is it actually making a difference?
Well, yes, as long as I can remember, the time-honoured way of proving you're doing something is to say, look, we're spending 38 million over 4 years, or we're spending 290 million over 4 years. And so, yeah, I've spent the money, I must have done something. Now, of course, you do have to spend money, and I don't think we're spending too much on the environment, let me tell you. That's my gut feeling. We're not spending too much. There's plenty we could be doing to head off problems, but we need to know it's effective. But I think that your question is potentially a little bit cynical. I think most ministers would really like to know about the effectiveness of what they're doing. Most people come to Parliament to make a difference. I don't think ministers are just about looking after themselves. They're interested in their portfolios. Even they don't know the answers to this. And one reason is that with the environment, it's never just a single portfolio that is contributing. Often things will run across multiple agencies. So ministers need, as much as backbench MPs, the information being pulled together. So my hope would be that the Treasury and the Ministry for the Environment could look at both ends of this telescope, if you like, look at the quality of information we gather on the environment, look at the money we're spending on the environment, and join the dots.
Simon Upton, thank you for your time.
Thank you.